Once upon a time, there was a remote farm located in the countryside. The farm had been owned by a family for generations, and it was said that strange things had always happened there. People whispered that the farm was cursed, but most folks just thought it was a silly superstition. Nevertheless, the locals avoided the place, and nobody ever dared to go there after dark. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the farm at night. They laughed and joked as they entered the property, not realizing the danger they were putting themselves in. As they walked through the fields, they noticed that the crops looked withered and sickly, and there were no animals in sight. Suddenly, they heard a strange noise coming from one of the old, run-down buildings. It sounded like someone was dragging a heavy object across the floor. The teenagers nervously approached the building, and when they peered inside, they saw something that made their blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the middle of the room, dressed in tattered clothes, with its back turned to them. The figure was hunched over and seemed to be muttering to itself. As the teenagers watched in horror, the figure slowly turned around, revealing its face. It was a woman, but her eyes were hollow and black, and her skin was pale and mottled. She stared at the teenagers with a sinister grin and let out a bone-chilling cackle. The teenagers were frozen with fear, unable to move as the woman slowly started to approach them. Just when they thought they were about to be attacked, the woman suddenly vanished into thin air. The teenagers ran for their lives, not stopping until they were miles away from the farm. The next day, the teenagers returned to the farm with a group of adults, hoping to find some answers. However, when they arrived, they found that the farm had been completely abandoned. The buildings were empty, and there was no sign of life anywhere. As they were leaving, one of the teenagers noticed something strange on the ground. It was a rusty old key, with the words "cellar door" etched into it. They decided to investigate further and followed the key to a hidden trapdoor in one of the buildings. As they descended into the darkness, they heard strange whispers and moans echoing through the tunnel. When they reached the end, they found themselves in a small room, filled with decaying furniture and strange symbols etched into the walls. Suddenly, they heard a voice behind them. They turned around and saw the woman from the night before, except this time, she was surrounded by a group of pale, ghostly figures. The woman cackled once again and pointed at the group, signaling for the ghosts to attack. The group fled the room, running back up the tunnel as fast as they could. As they emerged into the daylight, they realized that they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. They never returned to the farm again, and to this day, the place remains abandoned, haunted by the spirits of those who met their untimely demise there. Deep in the heart of the countryside, there was an isolated farm where an old farmer named Jacob lived alone. Jacob had lived on the farm for decades, and the locals knew him as a strange and reclusive man. Some even whispered that he was a witch or a warlock, but nobody dared to confront him. One autumn evening, a young couple was driving through the area and their car broke down near Jacob's farm. The couple, desperate for help, knocked on the door of the old farmhouse. Jacob opened the door, and the couple explained their situation to him. Jacob agreed to help the couple and offered them a room for the night. They were grateful for his kindness, and Jacob seemed like a harmless old man, so they accepted his offer. However, as the night went on, strange things began to happen. The couple heard eerie whispers and creaking floorboards throughout the night. They tried to ignore it, but their fear grew with each passing hour. The room they were staying in had an old wooden wardrobe, and at one point, the couple heard scratching and shuffling coming from inside it. As the sun began to rise, the couple gathered their things and prepared to leave. As they were leaving, the woman noticed something strange in the garden. There was a fresh grave, with a newly turned mound of earth. The couple confronted Jacob about the grave, but he refused to answer their questions. They left the farm, shaken and terrified, and immediately contacted the authorities. The police arrived at the farm later that day and uncovered a horrifying truth. Jacob had been murdering travelers who stopped by his farm for years, burying their bodies in his garden. The scratching and shuffling that the couple had heard in the wardrobe were the sounds of Jacob's victims trying to escape. The old farmer was arrested and sent to prison, but the farm remained a dark and foreboding place, haunted by the ghosts of those who had lost their lives there. The locals avoided the farm, and it became known as a place of death and despair, a reminder that evil can lurk in even the most remote and peaceful of places. On the outskirts of a small town, there was a large farm that had been abandoned for years. Rumors had circulated about the strange occurrences that happened there, but nobody knew exactly what had happened. One day, a group of teenagers decided to explore the farm to see if they could uncover the truth. As they walked through the overgrown fields, they noticed that there were no signs of animal life, no birds chirping, and no insects buzzing. It was eerily silent. As they approached the old farmhouse, they saw that it was covered in ivy and moss. The door was slightly ajar, and the teenagers, feeling brave, decided to investigate. The inside of the house was dark and musty, and the floorboards creaked underfoot. Suddenly, they heard a sound coming from upstairs. It sounded like a child crying. The teenagers cautiously made their way up the stairs and into a bedroom. The room was empty, but they could hear the crying coming from the closet. As they slowly opened the door, they saw a small child huddled in the corner, sobbing. The child was pale and gaunt, and it was clear that they had been trapped in the closet for some time. The teenagers tried to comfort the child, but they were too scared to speak. As they were leaving the room, they heard a loud banging sound coming from the basement. They made their way down the stairs and found an old wooden door that was locked. They could hear someone or something moving around behind it. The teenagers, emboldened by their bravery, decided to break the door down. When they did, they were greeted by a horrific sight. There was a room filled with cages, each one containing a person, all of them malnourished and weak. Suddenly, the group heard footsteps coming from upstairs. They quickly realized that they were not alone in the house. They tried to run, but it was too late. The owner of the farm had returned. The teenagers were trapped in the basement with no way out. The owner, a deranged and crazed individual, was determined to keep them there forever, just like the other prisoners he had collected over the years. The teenagers never made it out of the farm alive. The local authorities eventually discovered what had happened, but the farm remained a place of terror and death, a reminder that evil can hide in even the most innocent-looking of places.